So how in the world do you pay yourself? So this is a question that I receive a lot of times from business owners that are getting started. They're starting to generate revenue and they're trying to figure out a couple of things. Number one, when do I start paying myself? And then number two, how do I start paying myself? So I'm going to take this kind of in order of formation and of entities and walk you through it and let you know the various options that you have available to you to pay yourself. Now, I want to give this disclaimer because I don't want my license stripped away from me. I am not an attorney, so I cannot advise which type of entity you should form to limit your liability or anything like that. So you definitely want to make sure you consult with an attorney. All right, now we got all of that out of the way. So let's start talking about a sole proprietorship first. Now, a sole proprietorship is considered a disregarded entity. What is a disregarded entity? Great question. So this is going to be an entity that for tax purposes is basically ignored. Right? You can have your EIN that you've established under your DBA or anything like that, but for tax purposes, it's still going to go on your individual tax filing, right? So it's gonna show up on your 1040 on a Schedule C or Schedule E, Schedule F. It just really depends on what type of business you're operating. Now, the way you pull funds from a sole proprietorship is going to be via one way, and it's called a draw. And so you'll hear various names. You'll have members draw, you'll have owners draw, you'll have partners draw, but it's all the same thing. Essentially, it's you pulling funds from the business to use for personal purposes. Okay, that is it. So this can happen via withdrawal from the ATM. You can go into the bank and just pull funds out of the business account and use them for whatever you want to use them for. That's what an owner's draw is, or a draw. That's what that is. Now, one other way that I've seen this happen, which is not favorable, I do not advise that you do this, is I've seen where business owners have taken their debit card for their business or their credit card for their business and they've made personal purchases, right? That's just an accounting nightmare. I don't know who's doing your accounting, but that is a nightmare. So stop it. All right. So that is another way though that you can take a draw. You just have to know how to classify it properly within your accounting system. Okay. So sole proprietorships can take a draw. Now we want to talk about LLCs, and let's even lump in partnerships. Now this is still considered a disregarded entity. So it's just going to show up on your tax return on a Schedule C, but if you're a partnership, it's going to be a little bit different, right? So now you're actually going to form a partnership with someone else, and you're going to have to file a tax return with someone else, and this is going to be on a Form 1065. There will not be a quiz about that later. You don't have to worry about it, but it's Form 1065, and it's going to kick out a schedule called a K1. Now, this K1 is going to separate out your revenue, and that's what you're going to put on your tax returns, right? So that's how that's going to show up there. But for taxation purposes, you are able to pull those funds out because this is a disregarded entity. You can just take an owner's draw, right? So each of the partners, or if it's just you, which is considered a single member LLC, if it's just you, you can pull funds from the business and use that for personal purposes. If there are two of you, you can do the exact same thing. Now, the thing to note about a draw, and again, it's going to be called an owner's draw, member's draw, partner's draw. The thing to note about that is that it does not reduce your net income. So if your profit for the year is $50,000 and you pull $50,000 out of the bank account of the business, your taxable income is $50,000. Your profit does not change. All right, there's a whole accounting thing that happens where that shows up on the balance sheet under owner's equity, and there's just a lot that goes on there. Okay, so don't worry about that. Just know this: owner's draws do not reduce your business profit. All right, so know that. So that's for your sole proprietorship, and it's going to also be for your LLC and your partnership. Now, let's talk about the S corporation. So the S corporation, there's just this big, huge thing that everybody wants to be an S corp because it offers some type of savings. Now, we're going to talk about the S corporation, and another big topic we're going to talk about as it relates to an S corp is reasonable compensation. We're going to talk about that in a completely separate video, so make sure you stay stay tuned, subscribe so that you get the notification and everything for that, because that's coming soon. But reasonable compensation is essentially where the IRS says if you are a member of this entity, and you're also active in the operation of this entity, you need to pay yourself a reasonable compensation. And again, we'll dive into all of that in a completely separate video because that by itself is a lot. But when you're doing that, so here's one of the ways you can pull from your business as an S Corp. It's via wages. Okay, you're going to have those reasonable wages. That is a requirement. So you're going to have wages, you're going to have salary, you're going to have to process payroll to get that money. But another way that you can pull from an S Corp, is via a draw. That's the cool thing about an S corporation. Depending on how you form it, it does give you some flexibility. So you can take a draw there as well, but you have to be careful. So this is where tax planning really comes into play, because you want to make sure you satisfy the reasonable compensation requirement, and then you can start taking the draw. So make sure we connect on that. All right. So you have the reasonable compensation and you have the draw. So wages or draw. That's how you pull from an S Corp. Then you have a C corporation. So this is where it's completely separate. All right. So it's not going to show up on your individual tax return at all. So an S corporation is going to be very similar to a partnership. It's going to have a totally separate tax return. It's an 1120S for those of you that want to know. An 1120S is what you have to file. And then that same K1 goes over to your individual tax return. Now a C corp, totally separate, right? There's going to be an 1120 that you file, right? And there's nothing from that that goes onto your individual tax return. Now there can be some caveats there. There's some different things that could happen, but in general, it does not carry over to your individual tax return. Now, there are a few different ways you can pull from a C corporation. Number one is going to be the wages. Right? You can be an employee of your C corporation. Number two is going to be as a contractor. So you can actually be a contractor for the C Corp, right? Believe it or not, that's pretty cool. Number three is going to be dividends. All right. So you've probably heard the term, you're going to be dual taxed. You're going to be taxed twice if you form a C Corp. Well, this is where that comes from, right? So the C corporation is going to have its own tax rate, but then if you're pulling dividends, you're going to have another tax rate based on your individual tax return and the dividends that come in. So that's where they're talking about that dual taxation. That's where that comes from. But so again, for a C Corp, you're going to have wages. You could be a contractor as well. And then you're going to have dividends. Now, listen to me here. There are points within all of these entities where there can be something totally different that happens with proper planning, where you can pull from these different types of entities to create some tax savings. But there are things that you have to put in place, and we're going to talk about those in separate videos. But these are the general ways that you can be paid as it relates to these various types of entities. I hope that helps you guys. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Hit that little bell, bing, so you can be notified whenever a new video is coming out. All right, guys, we'll see you next time.